had on my hat as an ancient historian, which is my first real love, and I've done a lot of travelling around the world, and I particularly go anywhere where I could find ruins. Now, I've written a couple of books on ancient history. What I try to do is find a different aspect of ancient history. So I'm not known as like a big picture person. So one of my book I wrote was all the underwater archaeology of all the sunken areas. I think I spoke here a few years about that. Another one I wrote was all about the strange skeletons and that around the world in ancient times. And the third one I wrote was about how the ancient people used water and all the different water structures around the world they used. Because the ancient people all around the world were totally ingenious with the way they created water. And we should all be proud because each one of us is descended, whichever part of the world you're from, these amazing ancient people. We're all the living remnants, every single one of us. This other book I wrote, Subterranean Realms, it's because there is information out there, a lot of underground structures, but I didn't find any overarching book that looks at all of them from all around the world, on every continent except Australia. So I thought I'd write the book myself. And so this one is more a visual feast of just some of the amazing structures and what we know about them. And we can only speculate on how these amazing things were built. So I put them all into different categories: burials, worship, water, tunnels, mining and protection. I hope to show you an example of at least each one of them, why these underground structures were built up to many thousands of years ago. Let's start with burials. Now, catacombs, we've all heard of the catacombs. People might not be aware that it's mainly a Christian phenomenon, and there were very few Jewish ones in Rome and the Etruscans, but generally when you hear the word catacomb, we're talking about underground Christian burials right from the 1st century AD. Of course, Rome, anyone been to the Rome catacombs? Yeah, amazing, aren't they? Apparently they were quarries, so they were already built, dug out, and so they found a useful way for using them, just to bury people. Alexandria, I've been also in the 6-storey deep catacombs of Alexandria. I haven't been to Syracuse in Italy. Naples, I haven't been to those ones, but look, there were catacombs in a lot of areas where there were Christian burials. I've looked at some more modern ones too. Now that's generally what they look like. People were buried in the niche. Some of them go for kilometres and kilometres. They're quite amazing. I think I went through the Roman Domitilia ones many, many years ago. So yeah, it's actually a good way to bury people. It's all been dug out as a quarry, and then you've got just real niches into the wall, and you've got huge burial area. Who's been in the Paris catacombs? Fascinating, isn't it? I went there a few years ago. Down 200 steps. Now these ones aren't that old. They were quarries. I didn't just put all the ancient ones. I thought some of the more modern ones like this were fascinating too. There were quarries underneath Paris, and they decided to bury many, many thousands of bodies down there. And then of course they've all been rearranged into designs and everything. Apparently there are quite a few under there which are not open to the public, but you go down there, you walk around, and then you go up again. It's a pretty good thing to do. And a hint, if you go there, buy it online beforehand, because otherwise you'll be stuck in a queue for a while. So I certainly recommend the Paris catacombs. Remember, only like about 2,500 years ago. Now, even more interesting are the Palermo in Sicily. Hands up if you've been to these. Oh my goodness. These are not actually that far underground, but you go in there and the bodies are hanging on the wall. They started out doing the priests and the monks about 300 or 400 years ago, and they all dried out. And then people started bringing their relatives. So they are not in a coffin. They are just hanging on the wall. It's fascinating. You just go down different corridors and see these who died, who they're not fully mummified, but they don't have skin, but some of them do. Like this guy up the front there, he has a bit of skin. Where's he? That's fascinating. I just don't think it'd be a nice way to see Grandma, you know. It's not my idea of where I'd want to be buried. But this one, I just wanted to show this very poignant one. This little girl died over 100 years ago. I think she died of pneumonia. Her name was Rosalina. And there was an embalmer who learnt this technique. He had this technique no one else could use. So if you look at Rosalina, she looks like she's asleep. She has been embalmed in a way they have hardly even been able to replicate since then. You can look up, if you look up Palermo catacombs, you'll see Rosalina. And you just look at this dear little girl, and it's hard to believe she's been dead for over 100 years. So I thought that was a nice way to leave the catacomb. And it's obvious, look, she was one of them, she's actually in a glass-covered coffin. Otherwise, she would not be preserved like that. But as I said, that's only over 100 years old. But let's go back to the ancient stuff. Okay, who's been to the Malta Hypogeum? John? All right, now, no Maltese here? Come on, we've got the biggest Maltese group in Australia after Malta. None Maltese? Anyway, the Maltese had this amazing prehistoric culture. We don't know anything from their writing, we just know they had these stone temples. But they built this amazing structure called the Hypogeum, which is 3 stories deep. Now, they did this probably up to 5,000 years ago. And there were a lot of bodies found there. This was only found under someone's house, about 1905. So people didn't know it was there, and you can visit. Now, that's another one. If you go to Malta, you must book in advance, get your tickets, because they only allow 20 people per hour to visit these. So what happens when you take a tour? I must say it's not a great tour, but they give you one of those things where you listen and you follow the leader, and he turns on the lights as you walk around, and then if you're at the back of the line, you miss it, and then they've moved on. But if you look at that architecture, that's extremely unusual architecture, very advanced for up to 5,000 years ago. It almost looks Roman, but apparently these are very ancient, up to 5,000 years old. And look at that. Now, of course, they put lights on to show you around. You can't go down without that guide on that tour. There are some strange stories. The National Geographic wrote an article in the 1940s about a group of school children and their teacher who went missing in this Hypogeum and were never found. They wrote that twice. Now, I've never seen any other newspaper or anything to indicate that ever happened. So maybe it's just an urban legend. But according to that story, and I actually wrote an article on the Hypogeum in Nexus about 5 years ago, they certainly said a whole group of school children disappeared because what we see as a tourist, apparently there are a lot more tunnels than that which are being blocked off. And they could possibly lead right under the island of Malta and possibly even to the next island of Gozo. So it's fascinating. Now, what happened was they found 7,000 bodies, and yet not one of them is in the museum today, apparently. Now, my idea is it could be because these bodies had unusually long heads, elongated heads, and they're not popular for museums in a lot of countries to show off. But there was a race of long-headed people, I'm talking about cone heads, from the Black Sea down to Egypt, Syria, of course the Paracas people in Peru, Mexico. A lot of people had long heads. They're not very popular in ancient history. They just ignore them. I just don't think they have any real answers as to why their heads were like that. My own feeling, well, they've done DNA on some of the ones in Peru, and possibly some of the DNA is not, I've got to be careful how I say this, it's not matched to full human DNA on the father's side, I don't think. So it's human mother and possibly some alien or some other long lost race of people, humanoids. So, yeah, so apparently they do have a few of those in the Maltese museum, but you can't see them. Maybe only a few people get to see those.
The hypogeum is renowned for its acoustics.
Oh, that's a good point.
You might want to mention it.
Yeah, apparently there are people called archaeomusicians who go into ancient structures and measure the hertz. And they found out that certain voices and musical instruments brought in a resonant frequency. And one of them was a male voice at a certain hertz of 111 and a drum beat. It would resonate at 111, which I believe is a spiritual hertz. Is that, can anyone? Yeah, it's supposed to be a very good vibration anyway. So yeah, it's these archaeomusicians who are finding amazing things, and hypogeum is one of them.
If you whisper in any part of that chamber, it's heard throughout the chamber several times over.
There you go. So maybe that's why they give you that thing to listen to. You can't speak down there, and nor could you take photos. Yeah, we just had to listen to the information. Okay, now we're moving on to Egypt. Very, very ancient. This is the Step Pyramid. It's in Saqqara. It's supposedly the oldest pyramid built up of different layers of what was known as mastabas. It was built before, supposedly, if you believe the chronology, the three great pyramids by the pharaoh Djoser. And there was an architect called Imhotep. He was one of those geniuses that come up every few hundred years, like Da Vinci and that. He was an architectural genius, he was a medical genius, he was a poet. Imhotep was actually worshipped as a god for thousands of years after that. Now, the interesting thing about this is not so much what's on top, it's what's beneath the Step Pyramid. They have found many kilometres, well, up to about 7, of tunnels and chambers all beneath it. Let's see. Here's a map. There is this. Sorry, I speak both in feet and metres. This is 90 feet deep, this shaft. Goes all the way down, and then there's all these different rooms, burial areas. Now, we're talking about people who had same with the hypogeum, they had no metal to work with, hardly, because even then copper was basically not even used. They had, if we're to believe them, wood and bone. Now, I'm not sure how you build 90 feet into rock, sandstone, with wood and stone. That's one of the great mysteries. And the historians don't really want to talk about the why, because they don't know. Whereas to me, I love the whys. I like the mysteries, you know. They gloss over these type of things, but to me it's like, oh, come on, how do they do this? How long does it take us with earth-moving equipment to go 90 feet in sandstone? I mean, there's just something not adding up. And I don't have the answers. Please don't think I do. It's a great mystery, but I'm eternally fascinated, and I can only think that there's some technology that we don't have, we're not aware of, that the ancients had. So not only to build their fantastic buildings, but their substructures. That's what I love, the substructures too. Now there's another shaft not far from there. It's called the Osiris Shaft. This is on the Giza Plateau, sorry. It's not in Saqqara, it's in Giza near the big pyramids. As you can see, it goes right down to 100 feet. So we've got the shafts, entrance, down. Now, Zoe Hawass, who was the director of the Egyptian antiquities, he claims that he discovered this, which is totally wrong because they'd actually discovered this in the 1850s. And it was totally filled up with water and it was being used as a well. Now, no one knew till it was drained what was down there. And they only really discovered before Zoe took all the credit. Other people had actually drained some of the water and they found this, looks like a coffin, right down here at 100 feet. They said they haven't opened it yet. It was still a bit submerged. And because it's beneath the water table, it can flood. There are rumours that up to the sides, around there are tunnels which are closed off. Now, I did go to a lecture many years ago by a man called Hurtak. Anyone heard of Hurtak? Yeah. Now, he actually talked at there, and I can't find a video of it, of getting one of those submersible blow-up things, Zodiacs, and travelling from there through one of these closed-off things which don't exist, and discovering voids as big as cathedrals, he said, beneath the Giza Plateau. Now, something happened, he stopped talking about it, and it's basically gone down the memory hole, except I tried to resurrect it from my book, but I just worry that he's been threatened with that information because he never mentions it again. But if anyone ever found that video, I only found the one without the actual video, just the recording. And he mentioned he found all this stuff under the Giza Plateau. Now, if you listen to the authorities, there's supposed to be nothing hardly under the Giza Plateau at all. There's that thing, yeah. And we know that the Great Pyramid's got a bit of a substructure, but not a huge one, with water at the bottom. But it's all these other so-called tunnels and that which they don't like to acknowledge are there. There are people there like the people, the knowledge keepers, the indigenous knowledge keepers, a guy called Iawan. He's one of those, I forget his last name, but the knowledge keepers know a lot more. In fact, their families have been keeping the knowledge for thousands of years. These people have guarded the Giza Plateau for thousands of years, the knowledge keepers. And they only have decided, they only tell the historians so much because they don't trust them. Because when the archaeologists come to anywhere, they just, they desecrate the tombs, they take the things out. So if you really want to find out a place, find the indigenous knowledge keepers and gain their trust and you might get a lot more information. So this one can be visited, I haven't done it, but you can climb down some rickety ladder.
I've done it.
Ah, who's that? Oh, well done. What was it like?
94.
Did you see anywhere that could have been blocked off?
I didn't look that far, I don't think.
Yeah.
Didn't really understand.
So you went right to the...
Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, how much water was in it?
Yeah. Totally free. No allowed people being
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. It's the one thing I don't think I can manage a ladder that long, but...
yeah, it's very steep and very thin.
Yeah. And they don't know how old it is. I think they tried to say it's from the late period, but it could be much, much, much older. The late period's like about before 1000 BC, yeah?
It's actually Lyra, and it dates back to before 750,000 years ago.
Yeah, it could be. We don't know, do we?
So the pyramid is built on top of that. So those structures were there a long time before
They could be.
pyramids were erected. Just for your information.
Thank you. There's another picture. There's the ladders. I don't think I'd cope with those. And there's that coffin. They call it Osiris. They say it could be the tomb of the god Osiris. I don't know. But it's not like this thing was lost. It was lost in plain sight. I mean, you can see it's an entrance there. And it was filled up with water and used as a well for many years by one of the hotels. So, now there's all this stuff about the legends about what's under the Sphinx and the pyramids. Now, Zoe Hawass will say, oh, there's really nothing there. It's all lies and everything. Now, if you look at the top of the Sphinx, I haven't got a picture, but there's always, that's the head of it, I think. No, that's the head's up there. There is a hole there, but apparently that was only built by the archaeologists about 150 years ago, so we don't worry about that one. There's always a legend that something is buried beneath the pores of the Sphinx, and apparently there has been a chamber found quite deep there. Now they have to use radar to have a look. One of the things about the Giza Plateau, even though Zawi Hawass is very mainstream, he did actually allow a lot of the people from the Edgar Cayce Foundation to do radar echoes and everything around there. So as you can see from this Swiss guy called Rico Paganini, and I've actually reproduced it in my book with his permission. He's found that, and I've got a whole list of things, I could read them if anyone wants to hear, but it's just, it fell out, didn't it? No, anyway. What I'll say is there have been definitely cavities. They haven't been physically found, they've been found by radar going into them. Now, a physical cavity could be a cave, but it could be also a structure. So what did they find? They found a shaft here at the rump. I think Zoe Hawass actually went down and found that. There's been a corridor there. They found a corridor there. Now there are supposedly some chambers within the Sphinx. Now a lot of the Sphinx was falling apart and had to be shored up with, they covered in the holes and everything in the last 80 years, but apparently there still are some chambers within. There's another cavity down here. Ooh. There's a shaft there. Another chamber up here. Another cavity there. So as you can hear, when they say, oh, there's been nothing found under the Giza Plateau, that's not correct. A lot of they haven't physically dug down to find a lot of them, but a lot of anomalies have been discovered. Now this guy, Rico Paganini, he's got this amazing book. Oh, hang on, I'll just show this first. This is a side view. So apparently there are the tunnels that do go under the Giza Plateau. And they have to be careful because often they fill up with water. We are probably above the water table there. So things are not what they're telling us. But Rico believes, and he claims, that he went in this book. If you can get your hand on this, I bought it online just as a PDF. It's called the Giza Legacy. And he claims he and a group of 10 other people who are not well known, they keep quiet, they actually went down and found the Hall of Records. Yeah? Yeah?
I had a friend that also went over, and under the left paw, he went in, but he knew he had that mission to do that. But at the local, he was able to pay. There is an entrance, but he paid locals. Like when you go to Mexico, it's the same. When you go to Palente, you go into certain pyramids that see the sarcophagus of Pacal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. They have the knowledge. But look, I can't vouch that everything he says is true. But he said he went and with this group of people, sponsors, they went down and they found the Hall of Records under there, but it was in another dimension. So only people with special DNA could get in there. Now, I don't find that crazy because I've heard of it in a few other places on Earth. You actually have to have the right knowledge or DNA to get in to some of these. There's one in Tibet, and I believe there's one in Romania, or was it Bulgaria, in one of these mountains. So they are protected, but they're interdimensional. Now, I can't vouch for it, but I'm saying I believe it, yeah?
It's like a vibrational frequency
Yeah.
where it's in a dimension that's protected by a force field.
Yeah, that's right.
Unless you concur with that.
Well, that's it. So your average person would go down and see nothing. But if you had the right, well, it's not password, but you've got to have the right DNA, the right beliefs, and be allowed in, you could get through the force field and see the real things. That's the only way I could possibly describe it. Yeah?
Apparently the Freemasons own the whole of Giza Plateau.
Mm.
They're the ones that are stopping people and archaeologists from getting so far. Because they don't want the world to know what you're saying with the people.
Well, yeah, look, I can't say it's 100% sure that he has, but I'm only going on what he said, and yeah.
Yeah, when I went there in 1212, in 94, with the whole group of 240 people, there was I was only quite a newbie, but there were people that were able to remote view and look in the other side.
Oh, wow.
Where they wanted to go, and one guy did go in physically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And came out.
I think even if you remote viewed, you'd have to still have the right frequency, wouldn't you, to get through? Yeah, these places are protected. They must be extremely old. They'd have to be at least 12,000 years old, and possibly much more. So I'm the sort of person that likes ancient history. I know the academic, but I also like the esoteric stuff. So I have a foot in each camp. But yeah, I certainly believe there are things under the plateau, and they're being kept from us. And the Egyptians certainly don't want it coming out that there was another culture before them, because it undermines their national pride. You'll find that a lot happening now. People don't want to acknowledge that they weren't the people that built everything. So I really recommend, if you can get that book. And he wrote about a lot of things underground on the Giza Plateau. Now here's one they haven't found yet, but we know it's there. It's called the Hawara Labyrinth. Now how do we know? Because people in ancient times, like Herodotus, visited this place in Egypt. It's 2 levels, and it's under the sand somewhere, and no one's been able to find it since. But yeah, there are quite a few people in ancient times who visited. So the sand has only covered it probably in the last 2,000 years. But Herodotus actually went down into that. It's not real, but that's an artistic representation of what it could be like down beneath the Zawara labyrinth. Now, has anyone heard of Karen Mutton? She was a scientist. She actually did some, she's passed away unfortunately. She did some studies from the radar from the air and also LiDAR technology, where they look into the ground. And she found a structure with 2 different levels under there. But as far as we know, they're not looking for it. But what they do and what they tell us are 2 separate things. Now, it's very possible that the great archaeologist Woolley, he found a very big, long platform, and it's very possible he found the roof of it, but just thought it was nothing and let it be. So we do know that is there. We just haven't found it, and they haven't, as far as we know, dug it up yet. So that's another fascinating one under the sands of Egypt. It could be up to about 80 feet deep. So that'll be fascinating when they find that. Now we move on to Bosnia. Anyone been to the Bosnian pyramids? No, I haven't either. But your usual historian says, oh, that's just a mountain. Nah. But look, I've got a friend who went there, and the caves do have, or tunnels, actually that's more a tunnel, They do have healing qualities, and there's definitely a very ancient pyramid, or at least two of them, outside the city of Visoka. Now, of course, people don't want to acknowledge anything that old because it could be exceptionally old, could be older than the Egyptian pyramids. So at the moment it looks just like a pyramid-shaped mountain. It's covered in dirt and trees and everything. But they have done some excavations and found there certainly is some masonry under there. So I certainly am a believer that the Bosnian have this very ancient pyramid, and it has the tunnels underneath it. In fact, you'll find most pyramids have a tunnel system underneath it, a substructure. Why? We're not quite sure, but water often is an important part of the symbology all around the world, beneath the pyramids. You'll find that with the Mexican pyramids too. And we move on to Mexico. This is Teotihuacan. That's a very old city. It's about 2,200 years old. It was begun. Now, they only recently, it's a beautifully laid out city. It's just outside Mexico City. They've only found quite recently this tunnel system underneath there, underneath. And another interesting thing they discovered is a lot of mica. And they've found mercury under other pyramids. So my guess is it could have been some sort of industry or some sort of alchemy carried on beneath these ancient Mexican structures. Now, if we believe the history books, these people had no metals at all to build with. And they built all these amazing structures. So bone and wood and stone, that's about, I still don't know how they did it, but the evidence is there. They built them. They were built, but we don't really know how. Okay, so that's, pyramids are supposed to be burials, but I don't really think so. In fact, they hardly ever found any coffins in the pyramids. In the Great Pyramid, John and I made our way to there. And as you go into the Great Pyramid, you've got to go crouch for a long way. And you get in there and there's this big coffer. It's about this big stone coffer, not coffin. And so what do? The minute I get there, I jump in and lie there with my arms crossed. And then all these Chinese tourists, they were behind us and they were laughing and joking, and when they came in and saw this body lie there like that, they screamed and ran out. Look, I don't believe it was ever a coffin. I believe it was a coffer, and it was used for initiation, esoteric initiation purposes, but that's a belief. I can't prove it. Now we move on to protection. Now we move on to the centre of Turkey, to Cappadocia, where it's very volcanic, so the ground is the stone is very soft. And for thousands of years, at least probably nearly 3,000, people were building cities underground. Now, obviously, you don't want to live underground unless you have to, do you? So, protection from something or somebody. That is an area of Turkey where all these invaders came through from both sides, you know, from the east and the west. And what do invaders do? They come through, they steal everything, they burn the crops, they steal the animals and move on. And that's what people do in warfare forever. So I believe these people moved down underground when they knew invaders were coming. This goes right back to about, they say 600 BC, but they don't really know because you can't measure stone. You can't date stone very accurately. I believe that they were made to keep the people safe from invaders. And if you go down, the one I went down many, many years ago was 8 levels deep. And they had enough down there for people to last up to 3 months and up to 30,000 people. They had their own water supply. They had air vents. They had these big millstones, you know those big stone millstones? If you roll that across a door, no one can break through at all. So they would always keep it closed. Now this one, Derinkuyu, is one of the most famous ones. So I certainly believe, and then the Christians also, when the Turks came and started massacring the Christians 1,000 years ago, they also had to move underground. This area of Turkey was Orthodox Christian until 100 years ago. So the Greek-speaking people were there a long, long time. And they built beautiful churches in the rocks too. Here's just a model of one of these ancient cities. So, I mean, it wouldn't be a comfortable life, but if you could do it for a few weeks while the invader's going by and come out and keep your animals downstairs, keep some of your crops downstairs. They obviously had decent lighting, which of course would be just mainly fire unless they had another source we don't know about. But that area of Turkey, they're always finding new cities underground. In fact, people find it like, one of the main ones, I think it was Derinkuyu, some guy, his toilet was blocked and it kept backing up. So I got a plumber in and he started looking under, and then he opened up and found this massive cavity and a whole cave system. So there are actually underground cities, even going back to the Middle Ages, over Europe, Middle East, quite a few of them. But the famous ones are in Turkey, and I have visited, and they are absolutely amazing. This one in Iran goes back to Persian times. Now this one, of course, has been modified and turned into a bit of a, apparently some sort of shopping area, but it goes back to the time of the Persian Empire. So Iran had quite a few underground cities. Even in Armenia too, and Georgia, they had underground cities, often to do with worship. When Christianity was outlawed in early Roman times, sometimes they would build a city underground. So they're quite amazing. Now the medieval cities, there's quite a lot all over Europe. Nottingham, Nauers, Cadiz, they had so many of them. Budapest, quite extraordinary. Now this one's back in Gorome. Remember I said the Greeks were there? Right from Byzantine times, right through to this last century. They built these beautiful churches, Orthodox churches. This one was the Church of the Buckle. It's in that Gorome Valley in Cappadocia. All underground, all built in the rocks, all beautifully illustrated. Now we move on to India, and where church was one of worship. Now we're looking at another country with amazing structures. This one is in Allura. Now these people, this was all carved out of the rock from the top down. Now I haven't got people there and I haven't visited. Oh, look at the size of these people. So I don't know how you build something from the top down, but look at this amazing structure they built. So this was the rock going all down there. They somehow carved it out and built this amazing thing called the Kalaisa. It was built about 1,500 years ago, something like that. It's a Hindu shrine. So India has many tunnels and amazing stone temples. That one just, it's on the list one day to visit. But yeah, extraordinary. Now the Ethiopians are probably the only other people who built amazing structures from the top down. Imagine how hard that'd be. So they built this church. They were some of the earliest Christians were the Ethiopian. It's in a town called Lalibela. Now you also cannot get an idea of the size, but I think this next picture, got anybody? Oh, there's a little guy over there. Is that a person? So these things are absolutely huge. And there's little tunnels connecting other buildings. So look, you just have to be amazed at the ingenuity of these people, building these extraordinary structures from the top down. I emphasise that because I can't imagine how hard that is to build something from the top down. Now we moved on to some of the caves and tunnels built in ancient India. They're Buddhist and Hindu. These are called the Ajanta caves. Anyone been there? I haven't.
Very close to Allura. I haven't been
Yeah, Ajanta and Ellora, yeah, I'd love to, but they built about, there were caves and they modified them and built all these worships. This one looks Buddhist, I think it's called a Chaitya. But they built all these things were carved into the stone. And I wrote about all of these in my book, by the way. And you think I'm selling it? No, because I don't have any to sell. But yeah, quite extraordinary. And the beautiful artwork too in this. That's the Ajanta. So all of this was built right into the rock in ancient India. Quite extraordinary. And here's some of the Buddhist paintings from Ajanta. They had lots of beautiful paintings inside them. So the Buddhists very fond of building temples in rocks. It was quite a common thing. In China too, they did it. Yeah. Now going back to another cave, the Bhairava cave, this can't really tell, but this isn't very far in, but these rocks, apparently, they polished them to an extremely high sheen. Very, just using stones, apparently, emery stones. But it's probably some of the best high sheen work done in the ancient world. The Persians were the other ones who did it. So that's more technology. Quite amazing. Now we move on to the Persians. Now water, remember I had water on my list? That's what my whole book, Water Realms, was about, where the ancients got their water from. Now some of the most, and I did an article in Nexus on this. Persia is a very dry land. It's flat, but it also has hills. So way back about 2,500 years ago, or maybe even a bit longer, the Persians came up with this really ingenious system called the Qanat system to find water and to irrigate all their lands. Now this is how they did it. Let's see if I can see it better over here. Okay, now firstly they'd have to find, just say this down here is arable land. They would then send a very specialised person up there. Now he would look for a stream. He'd just find a little bit of water coming from a rock or something, and then he would know then there's something there. And he would then build a mother well. So he would dig right down there, below the water table, if he found the water, and then he'd decide, right, this is worth it, I'm going to build a Qanat. So maybe he had to go like a kilometre. So then they'd get very skilled people who would build about every 100 metres or so a well all the way down. And then they would tunnel underneath. Now as you can see, that's the water table. But then the water would be found and it would go down very, very gently through the Qanat tunnel, and it would be distributed once it came out of the mountain. Now they did this all over the Persian Empire. If you ever see these dry countries with little oases, these came because of the Persian Qanat system. The Egyptians used it from the Persians, the Chinese used it, all through Central Asia used it, Northern Africa used it. So it's one of the great water hydrological inventions of the ancient world. Now that's what it looks like from the top. Even today, a lot of these Qanats are still there. So there are families who keep these Qanats and have been keeping them for thousands of years. And in ancient times, the Persian king would give a family money to keep the Qanats working, and he would excuse them for taxes for 5 generations if they could build a Qanat system. So they were all over Persia, and some of them are still working today. And this is one. This was like one of them looked like. It might have been fixed up in the last few hundred years, but beautiful fresh water. So what they had to do, it's like the Romans did it later with their aqueducts. Now, you might think if you just get an aqueduct, water coming down from the mountain, you just build a slope down, but it's not that easy. You had to have the right angle. Because if you did it too steep, the water would come gushing down and you wouldn't be able to control it. So both the Romans and the Persians had to measure the exact, maybe 2 or 3 degrees to build their tunnels. So, I mean, we're talking about advanced geometry here and very amazing structures. They've got a similar thing in Peru called the Puquios. Now, what they did here, very dry area of like the Nazca area, they had these whirly things which would get the wind to go down and get the water moving. And of course, there are arguments as to how old these are. Some say, oh, these were built by the Spaniards, but it's very likely that they were built much, much older, some of them, and maybe fixed up in the last 500 years. But that's how they irrigated all these areas in Peru as well. Of course, the Romans were great engineers, and the aqueduct builders. I mean, the aqueducts the Romans built were quite extraordinary. But this was their first big tunnel was the Cloaca Maxima in Rome. And that's still today. That's the big water tunnel under Rome. And it was built like about 500 BC by the Etruscans and then the Romans. So it's quite extraordinary what the Romans were able to do. Now this is another one. This is a mine. Now the Romans, as I said, had great technology, and to get down on these, each one's on each level, they had these little water wheels to drain the water. All of this, water wheels. That's great technology there. It was actually invented, these water wheels, by the Hellenistic Greeks, around about 300 BC. All these water wheels to keep this mine viable, just to keep the water out. As anyone who knows about mines, they fill up with water. So they came up with amazing ways to not only build deep mines, but to keep the water out. Now here's another one. We did a tour here. Has anyone been to one of the salt mines around Holstadt? Yeah, they're fabulous, aren't they? These were 2000 BC around the Celtic peoples. And they built many, many mines. And one of the great products used for trade in those days was salt. So around Salzburg were the salt mines. And we did a tour down there. Now, it was a fascinating tour. So if you ever go to Salzburg, which actually is the name of a city, Salz, that's built on the ancient salt. This is just a diorama of the ancient people working these mines. And it was quite extraordinary what they built down there. Now, this is how they used to get by in modern times, but we went down there. To get to the different levels, you got to go down this slide. And it was real fun, wasn't it? You had to wear a special suit, but it was amazing. And these mines were still open, so they're still working, some of the mines. And that's how the miners would get down to the different levels. I just thought that was a nice photo to add. So if you get to Salzburg and you like underground things, go down the salt mines. Okay, so we've seen the way these structures were built. We know they were built for protection, for water, but how is much more difficult. Did power sources exist that we're not aware of? Well, I have to think that. I have to wonder. Now here's, look at this ancient core drill from Egypt. Any engineers here? I mean, does that look like someone with a chisel and stone built that? Stone, wood and copper implements? Look, I'm sorry, but I can't believe that. That looks like high technology to me. Now here's Petrie was, I think he was an engineer, but he also became an archaeologist, and he looked at these drills. This is from a drill core. It was in the museum. And he found out that to make this core, a feed rate of 0.100 inch per revolution of the drill, which was 500 times greater than modern diamond drills. But the rotation of the drill would not have been as fast as the modern drill's 900 revolutions of the minute. That's pretty technical, but basically the point is this did not seem to be made in using ancient things the way we knew they were. I think I had a little bit more about Petrie, see if I can find it, because it's very interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll just read you a bit more. Christopher Dunn, a British-American author and technologist, was astounded by the precision cutting techniques employed by the earliest Egyptians and claimed they had access to lathes, tubular drills, stone and bronze saws, as well as circular saws. He was particularly interested in the findings of English Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, who had been excavating Egypt from the 1880s, and marvelled at the technological expertise of many objects and building elements. Petrie, an engineer, not only studied the circular holes drilled, but also the central cores, that's the core, which were extracted. Regarding tool marks which left a spiral groove on the granite, he wrote, "The spiral of the cut sinks 0.100 of an inch in the circumference of 6 inches, or 1 in 60, a rate of ploughing out of the quartz, which is astonishing." So I guess the point is, how do they do it? I don't know. Now here's another one, Christopher Dunn. He's a modern technologist, and I'm sure some of you have come across the Giza power plant. He believes it had certainly another function. This is what he says. The Great Pyramid was a geomechanical power plant that responded sympathetically with Earth's vibrations and converted that energy into electricity. They used electricity to power their civilization, which included machine tools, which they shaped hard, igneous rock. I'm not proposing that this civilization was more advanced technologically than ours on all levels, but it does appear, as far as masonry work and construction are concerned, they were exceeding current capabilities and specifications. Making routine work of precision machining huge pieces of extremely hard igneous rock is astonishingly impressive. So it's very possible they had access to tools or help or whatever that we don't know. Now, I found this. Could these have been tools? Now, the Egyptians didn't tell us in their hieroglyphs this was a tool, but there are certain images which come up again and again. One being the ankh. This here is a jed pillar. And this is something the pharaoh carried, a crook. Now, if you look at this picture here, it looks like a tuning fork. 2 tuning forks, and something's happening between them. You know about the tuning forks, you hit one. So it's alluding to some technology we are not aware of. Now, I am cautious, I certainly do believe there was an Atlantis and ancient cultures, but I like to see some sort of evidence. But to me, I believe this one especially, the jed pillar, we see that all through ancient Egypt. That almost looks like one of those electrical things, you see, transformer or something. So it's just a possibility, but Here's another interesting one in Saudi Arabia. How did someone cut that? It certainly looks like it's been cut, precision cut. And just this last one. Now, there's another thing I wrote in my book. Apparently some scientists try to say that certain plants and sulfuric acid could melt rocks, which it could be possibly how they built some things. Now there's something here. Look at this rock here. It certainly looks like it's been melted to fit in that spot. There's another one. And look at this here. This stone looks like it's been folded. It's been cut and folded and then dried. So some more precision cutting. And of course this is not in Egypt, but incredible precision cutting in Peru. Right, well, I'll leave that as, I hope you've enjoyed the ancient underground structures.